Hello everyone, good morning, afternoon, whatever it is where you are. So I'm glad to be back. We were together, many of us last fall, in November I think it was, with part one, and I want to talk a little bit about what I did then and what we're going to do about today. But we're calling today, Taking the Change Leader into the World. And so today again, I'm thinking of this as not business as usual. This is where we're going to continue to try to take some risks. We're going to try to move out of your normal comfort zone and begin with what I think of as beginner's mind. And that is, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the experts, there are but few. And I think when we begin, like myself, teaching or consulting for a long time, we begin to think of ourselves as the expert. And really, for what we're talking about, leading change in this new world, we really have to enter into that, I think, with the beginner's mind. So that's where we're going to try to begin today. Focus of part one was really starting with you as the change agent, or you as the transformer, and really working on how do you lead from the inside out, if you remember that. I think it's on the website for WCN, is it? So you can see if you missed that or want to refresh, this is what we talked about last fall. And then to the edge and beyond, how do we care for ourselves as we're trying to engage in a transformative way in the world. So today's focus, we're going to extend part one a bit more. I'm going to do a little reminding, but we're really talking about now faculty, how you lead in the classroom, how you lead with other faculty and staff, and then how you lead in your institution in the community. And much of this, as you will remember, in taking the change leader into the world, the center slide is a really nice little photograph of people from Washington State. So the slide is Mindy Schaffner from the Nursing Commission, Mary Sue Gorski, who was a president of CNews, taught at Gonzaga Nursing School, and is now working with me at Robert Wood Johnson, or I'm working with her at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and then Suzanne Sikma, who does a lot of academic progression work in Washington State and teaches at the UW School of Nursing. So I use that in our taking the change leader into the world because they started local. And I really want to talk about that a lot today because reading the NLN materials on competencies for leadership for nursing faculty, they really are pushing this more global, scaling up. And I really want to bring us back to focus locally. Do a really great job in your classroom, at your own university, or college, or school, and then let that wave move out. But I want you to just find a little scratch paper, take your pen out, and rate yourself today on, here's the scale. 1 is I'm barely here, and 5, this is my best day ever. So how present and undistracted am I right now? How present and undistracted? So 1 would be barely here, 5 is the best day ever. How present and undistracted are you right now? How open and curious do you feel on a scale of 1 to 5? How open and curious do you feel? How brave do you feel to inquire and take risks today? How much do I feel able to contribute to others? How much do I feel I can contribute to others right now? 1 being barely anything, 5 being the best day ever. And last, how willing am I to support others' learning as well as my own today? 1 to 5, just a quick. And the reason I'm doing this is a lot of times, especially those of us who go to meetings, go to classes, go to conferences, we sit down and we forget about what we need for ourselves as learner and what we bring in and what our own consciousness is when we sit down to learn and learn in a group also. So I'm bringing back for you here, and is the NLN competencies. And it's competency number 5, function as a change agent and leader. And I have to say that when I read this, I thought, oh my gosh, I have a priest friend who says all this and hell too. And I read this, and I thought, these these nursing educators, they're expected to do culturally sensitive, plus all their teaching, advocating for change in a culturally sensitive way, create, innovate, and be strategic in their long-term thinking, be interdisciplinary in all their efforts, provide leadership in the parent institution and nursing program, and then promote innovation, in practice, in the educational environment as well, and then develop leadership skills to shape and implement change. And I thought, oh my God, how can they do all of what rest of they're doing and competency number 5? And then I realized that is why Maggie Baker from CNews and WCN was so interested in having us have a conversation about this. And so I really see this as I looked around when you checked in, that many of you are in small groups in your colleges. I hope you can have a conversation about some of this as I'm going to give you time today, because I don't think I want you to leave today thinking I'm adding more to what you've already expected to do. I think you already do enough, and you are enough. So let's talk about strategies to be change leaders without doing more. That's my intention for today. And some of this comes from the article out of the Journal of Nursing Education from last October, where many nursing educators reported that they had high levels of emotional exhaustion. They were making plans to leave their jobs as soon as possible, even before retirement age. Drained and used up by the work, lacking energy to face another day. Work and personal life were reported as out of balance, and yet, and this is the thing that always surprises me, and boy, the city, the government, the city, the state, the nation are lucky that nurses are like this, because 85% of those surveyed still said they had high job satisfaction. So this is like amazing to me. So I want to just have us take a moment where we can sit back and think together and see how true this is for you, but this is my observations, and I'm doing a lot of work with Meg Wheatley right now, both as a student of hers and a colleague. And she wrote, if you remember back in the 90s, Leadership in the New Science, which took quantum physics and chaos theory, put them into organizations, and talked about how systems really change in a much more organic way than we have been taught in the more mechanistic way of organization as machine. So that got her a lot of fame and notoriety, and now she's moving much more to a different kind of leadership. It's out of organizations, because she really has a sense that all organizations are in the state of collapse right now, or failing in some way, shape, or form. And so she's trying to talk about how can we who are still in the systems take care of ourselves and each other, and still try to do the work of the system while it's failing, while giving time for ourselves and maybe others to build new systems. And I'll talk more about that later. So, but let me talk about the world we live in, and why I think we need to start talking about leadership and change in a very different way. So this is out of a Buddhist teacher of mine who I really appreciate what she said. The whole globe is shook up. So what are you going to do when things are falling apart? You're either going to become more fundamentalist and try to hold things together, or you're going to forsake the old ambitions and goals and live life as an experiment, making things up as you go along. Now, that quote gives me incredible hope and freedom, because if I thought I had to live in these systems that are making less and less sense all the time, I don't know how I could keep doing it. So here's what I think in the state of the world of things falling apart, and wanting to be a different kind of leader. Deborah Fries, who's out of Boston, and Meg Wheatley wrote a book in 2013 called Walk Out, Walk On. And this is what they said: these kinds of leaders in times of failure of systems play a crucial role in societal transformation. They use this time of dissolution and failing systems to create and experiment with new ways of working and organizing, finding solutions to seemingly unsolvable problems. So again, it's a chance, it's that, what's that old thing with crisis being opportunity and some threat at the same time? Am I getting that quote right? So the classic response for nurses, and I'm being a nurse, know this, understand this, but the classic response for nurses when you say the system is terrible, everything's just going to hell in a handbasket, Here's what we do, and I showed this cartoon last time, and I think it's still true. There's these two women at the door, and this giant hideous insect is outside the door, and she says, "Calm down, Edna. Yes, it is some giant hideous insect, but it could be a giant hideous insect in need of help." And for us, nurses, this is our catnip. This is what we are continually drawn to. Oh, they might need help. We can fix it. And it drives us, and it's the good part of us, and it's the shadow challenge part of us. And then we think we'll change jobs, find something else, go to a different school to teach, or a different place, a practice site, and then this same poor woman, she's jumped out of a burning building on one side, is catapulted off the fireman's trampoline into a burning building across the way. And I'm afraid that's what it's like right now, even more so when I first started thinking about this 25 years ago. There's fewer and fewer systems, if any, that you can jump out of and into one that's not experiencing the same thing. So let's think for a moment. Now I want to just say, if you're tempted to run out before I get through this next thing of how grim stuff looks, the world looks, I'd ask you to stick around, because I'm going to end with a little bit of hope and a lot of what we can do. But it does get dark, and I think the leader now has to not be afraid of how dark things can be sometimes. And we can't keep pretending that things are just fine. So here's what I think of as the bigger story. So here on the cartoon, we have the history of man. The guy at the middle pane says, "What the hell is happening?" The end. So we spend a lot of time right now just trying to figure out what the heck is happening. When I talk to nurses, nurse educators, nurse leaders, nurse executives, they and boards are often saying we spend most of our time not in generative new thinking, but trying just to figure out where the ground is for us to stand on now. I like this slide, if you can see it where you are. It's a solar system picture, and it shows the little orange arrow is on this pinprick of a light, and that's Earth. And so it helps me to remember we are just a little small dot in the great cosmos. And so the fact that we get up in the morning and are loving and kind is a tremendous miracle. So on the global, and this is not just true in the United States, this is globally true. What is impacting leadership now? And this is, I think, things that will be very familiar to you. And I'm going to go through each one of them a bit. Time compression, burgeoning bureaucracy, unending austerity measures, distraction. So let's talk about time compression. Right now, this was from Harvard Business Review in 2010, and I think it's even more true today. Many organizations expect employees to work at levels 2 to 4 times higher than capacity. Let me read that again. Many organizations expect employees to work at levels 2 to 4 times higher than capacity. Now, I would be so interested if we were all in one room to just ask for a show of hands if you agree with that or not. But what people report to me, what I experience, is overloading, multi-loading, and perpetual loading. This year, when friends would say, "What are you going to do for your New Year's resolution, Heather?" I said, "I'm not going to do anything. For my New Year's, I'm taking things away. I'm going to not do things for my New Year's resolution." And it's not about like not drinking, not smoking, whatever, but not like not having a calendar so full, slowing down. So what is it that how can, so I want to talk later when we get into your smaller groups, and you're going to talk about strategies. What strategies can you do to help address the issue of time compression? Another sign of this is at Barnes & Noble, they have these 30-second books now. They have 30-second economics, the 30-second Bible, 30-second politics, and 30-second theories. And the caption there is 50 of the most thought-provoking theories in science, each explained in half a minute. Now, what kind of world do we live in where you could have 30 seconds to understand the Bible, understand theories, understand the economy? It's ludicrous. And so then we come to our own scheduling, and I showed this last time. It's my favorite cartoon in the whole world. The guy goes, "No, Thursday's out. How about never is never good for you?" And I find now I do meetings with entities all around the United States, and so we're dealing with time zone differences, et cetera. And we spent almost long enough time in our scheduling that we could have addressed the issue that we were trying to address by finding a meeting time. And I can't imagine what it's like in your world around the whole issue of scheduling. So this out-of-control date book, people leave a meeting, they don't have time to do the work from the meeting before they have to go to another meeting. And so the speed at which we were supposed to have more time with all technology has really just enabled us to speed up and do actually in some ways less. I saw this too: drink coffee, do stupid things faster and with even more energy. So this is out even in cartoons in I think this might have been a coaster or something. So it's in the ethos out there. And I talked about this last time, but I think it's important to keep thinking about is you live the life at the speed you travel. And so I talked last time about I took off around 8 months for a sabbatical. And I just slowed down so much. I got to know the rhythm of the neighborhood. I got to know the merchants in the neighborhood. I got to know my family better. My friends, they're all complaining about me working full-time again now. So I had a whole different, it's a very different life than the one where you're traveling so fast. So that's time compression. The other thing is this bureaucracy that is continuing to grow and grow and grow. And by this, I don't mean government oversight of clean water and clean air and our oversight of people not having their buttons muted. All right. So in talking about bureaucracy, I think you've all seen in your own work where your accreditation visits from 5 years ago are more intense now, other kinds of oversight in your own work. And then I just saw this sign here. I thought, oh my God, look at this. I mean, no dogs, no roller skating. It's no. What can you do here? There's no skateboards. I guess anything with wheels or a pet. So that is just a little example of how much right now that we have so much bureaucracy, paperwork. When I talk to practice nurses, they of course continue to talk about the charting issues and time with the computer instead of time with the patient. So we have that. Then we have the ossifying, I love this, ossifying amounts of reports and measures, so that you have less and less time to do the work because you're writing the reports and measuring what you limited ability that you have to do anything, you're having to write reports on it. And then mindless budget cuts. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't areas that we should cut the budget in, but when you look at budget cutting practices that this current, let's say the last 5 years, have engaged, Congress and many state legislatures have engaged in, and universities have been across the board. They've been using a hatchet instead of a scalpel, and they have not been carefully thought through. So we have this issue of budget cuts that do not make sense. And then we have the issue of being distracted. We've had a little of that right here today around with technology distracting us, but I just think there's the slide behind me of people at an art museum not looking at the art, they are looking at their text. Here's a couple out for dinner together texting, and here's what I love, this one, the community coffee cafe, and everyone's sitting alone, everyone's with their computer or their cell phone. So we have become less and less connected, and for nursing, where we really, connection is our lifeblood, this whole issue of being distracted, I think is hampering our ability to teach well and to care for others. And I love this new draft of Maslow's new hierarchy of needs, where you have the self-actualization at the top, and then one of the basic needs now is Wi-Fi. If people go at a conference cannot get Wi-Fi, that is the first thing they call up for. They'll be in a big conference room and they won't say, oh, who's the keynote speaker? Or what are we having today? They'll want to know what's the password to get on that Wi-Fi. Which means, why do you need that if you're going to be in the conference all day? But there you go. That's how we are. We are just so overloaded, and we continue to do that. So my favorite boat, the Titanic, is coming up here, and I think that for a lot of us, we are on the Titanic. When I took my sabbatical, this is what I felt like. I was not just being paid well to rearrange the deck chairs, but then they wanted new deck chairs flown in, and they wanted, or the deck chairs reupholstered. And that's when I got this sinking feeling that it was, no pun intended, that it was not making a bit of difference in the world that I wanted to make a difference in. So how do we talk about this? How do we tell our story around this? And I think about, in working with Meg Wheatley, who's done work all over the world, she has this collection of 3 slides that I think are so powerful, especially for those of us who are nurses who we really believe in storytelling. So she says, here's how the Celts tell their story, with the different kinds of intricate knots. And each of those are sort of endless loops. And they can tell a story. They can use color. They can do shape. And they can tell a rich story of their family through this. And then the Tibetans, very similar. And they tell their story this way. So then you think, well, how do we as Americans tell our story? And here you have behind me this lovely little bar graph, or graph. So this is what, and I think, oh, is that really true? And so as I watch now, I see this all the time. When people want to talk about high rates of incarceration for people of color, especially young black males, we don't talk about what that does to the community. We don't tell that about the story behind the story. We show the graphs, we show the charts. When we thought, another thing I think about is when you listen to the news in the evenings, it starts with the economy. And as if the economy were a human being, as if the economy didn't have a story behind it and how it's set up. So the paucity of spirit in how we tell our story is really true. So then I'm thinking for you out there, teaching, trying to hold things together, doing the best job you can, as an outlier, because you're thinking, I don't want to fall prey to a number of negative behaviors or beliefs that could happen in this world. How am I responding? How am I responding this time? And I have this great poster, this is on my wall in my office, it's don't shush your inner voice, it's who you really are. So let's think about how you respond to this. Do you work harder to try to fix things? Do you rewrite your report, redo your presentation, or search for more evidence? Oh my gosh, search for more evidence of what is so obvious. We have forgotten the power of common sense right now. Or do you blame colleagues, bosses, administrative assistants, others for what's wrong? Or are you overcome with grief and despair sometimes by this? If you really sat down, a lot of people, when I get one-on-one with them and we have a longer conversation, they said, Heather, if I really went where you're talking about, I would be so overcome with grief and despair that I couldn't continue. So I just put it in a box and I keep pretending it's not as bad as you're talking about. Or another approach is to go to battle. And oftentimes I'll see people out there that are in this warrior fighter. They are, out there in a stance that's very aggressive because of this. And some walk away. And we see that in that earlier comment about people in nursing education thinking they're going to retire earlier, or that some people who just walk away. Or do you collapse into cynicism? And that, I always think that is almost the worst. It's better to walk away than to stay and make everyone else miserable with your cynicism. So, or do you just focus on the good parts of your life? And in this one, Meg Wheatley uses this one around shopping, but I think there's other ways we can just ignore what's going on through drugs, alcohol especially for a lot of us in nursing. We are high users. So how do these dynamics show up in your life? Being exhausted, feel stressed or anxious? Do they show up in your relationships at work or home or with friends? And do you get angry or frustrated easily, or not even easily, but do you feel you're constantly angry or frustrated and distracted and very judgmental and blaming in your attitudes? And then so when I took this one the first time, I wrote down how I was reacting, and then the last question pops up, that if I continue to do this for another year, who will I be? If I continue to be this exhausted, this stressed, this angry, frustrated, distracted, and angry, what kind of person will I be in another year? So I want to talk now, and then I'm going to give you a chance to talk in your small groups. I want to talk a little bit about how people who persevere through this time of what I think of as disillusion and dissolution is, what do they have to deal with? They have to deal with fear. They have to deal with aggression, failure, criticism, They have to deal with relationships of all kinds and exhaustion and despair, and not be afraid of any of those. Now, I have this as a handout to send to you after our session today, but I found this really useful. It's a little bit like what I shared with you last time on Thrivers, but I like this. This was written by a gentleman who has interviewed several million people, which I think is a pretty good end, and saw that those folks who could really adapt and be successful in taking charge of their own lives. Now, which I think is really an important thing right now. Not to be ruled by fear, not to be ruled by some external entity, but to be in charge of yourself. This is what they said. There were 12 things. One is they forgive themselves, that they don't have to be perfect. They don't say yes unless they really want to. They don't seek perfection. They focus on solutions. They avoid asking what-if questions, which are the worry ones. Now, I'm not saying the big obvious ones, but you know how you can worry down into the minutia until you feel incapacitated and don't do any movement forward. So any change in your classroom instruction, you might say, oh my God, what if this happened, what if that happened, and what, oh my God. And then the fear-based ones are always, what will the lawyer say if we do this or do that, in the world I'm working in a lot now. So they don't ask those down to the minutia where it incapacitates them. They stay positive, they eat, they sleep, and they exercise. Now these are things that you think, oh, you know, they seem so basic, but I think that is where we often neglect ourselves, is in how we eat, how well we sleep, and how well we exercise. And then they meditate. They take time out, one way or another, to just be quiet and be with themselves, their own thoughts. And that was a common of the 12 aspects of folks who seem to be very successful in self-management. They ride the wave. So instead of fighting it all the time, they find their own, which I like this part when you read when I send this out to you. It's not like they're doing what comes easy. Is things are going, so they take an opportunity, they take advantage of the opportunity, and that's what the ride the wave means. And then they squash negative self-talk, which I think I would have listed first up there. So the question for you now in your smaller groups that I think would be really useful, if we could just have you, and if you're in a small group by yourself, then that's a fine group to be in. But to think what I have up here, what are the 3 strategies that you could enact on Tuesday morning that would positively shape change or innovation. So 3 strategies that would help positively shape anything you're thinking about wanting to change or improve in the classroom, with other faculty, or in your institution itself. What 3 strategies could you enact? Now, I laid out this rather grim picture of the world, and then I talked a little bit about what kinds of strategies you could do to take care of yourself in that. And now this question is really, I'm asking or imploring to think now and with a beginner's mind. And I'm going to give an example. What could you do differently? What strategy could you enact that might help you tomorrow morning, whether it's in your classroom or with other faculty members, with your staff or in your institution, that could help begin a change effort that you're interested in doing? And this is the kicker. It has to help recharge you. It has to enhance your sense of joy and creativity. And it has to ground you in the present moment. So for example, in talking with the planning group about today, one of the questions, I guess, I don't know all obviously the nursing literature on nursing education, but there are some studies out now that say perhaps a 10-page paper would be as effective for your students' learning as a 25-page paper. Now, if this is true, it makes sense because it's harder to be concise and precise in a smaller amount of time and space. And you don't have to correct a 25-page paper or edit or read or whatever, however you talk about it now. You don't have to review it you have to review a 10-page paper. So it seems to me that that would be a strategy, that I would ask less and get more. I would, and then I would have to do, I would have to do less. So that's what I'm thinking these strategies might be, that you could start thinking about, that you could take back charge of your time and your mental health and your sense of joy and creativity. So I'm hoping that's clear. Just what 3 strategies as a nursing leader could you start this week that would help shape and decrease your sense of exhaustion, increase your sense of joy at work? What might that be? And then what would be fun is to hear what faculty are saying around the state. Greetings. Can we have one of the sites? Not there, a little high, okay. Could we have one of the sites check in with a report of what strategies you came up with in your smaller work groups? Any site.
Hi, this is Laura Columbia College.
Okay.
We came up with quite a few of them, and the first one was kind of symbolic, was to turn down the static in life, both and literally. And another said keep work at home, or work at work and home at home. So we talked about work-life balance. We talked about regular exercise, sleep, maintaining the right attitude, to be open-minded and positive. Beware of wishing life away, so in other words, be in the moment. We talked about the importance of collaboration. We liked the phrase that one of the faculty suggested, which is just start. So in other words, just start the task and break it down into small pieces. We talked about refocusing, prioritizing, and using quiet time to do so. And transitioning, find ways to transition gracefully. One faculty starts her day early and visits with their students to transition into class time. And look for ways to compliment people. And that was our list.
Wow. Nice work. That was Lower Columbia? I'm sorry we don't have, how come we can't see them now?
He told me that as soon as we muted ourselves.
Oh.
Do you need somebody to speak up?
Maybe. No, we heard you well. No, that's great. Thank you so much. I was just trying to, because I want to be able to see you all. Okay, so what other group would like to jump in? Thank you, Lower Columbia.
We have a small group here. It won't take long. Columbia Basin College.
Okay.
We attribute a lot of our coping skills to our age. If we haven't figured out how to cope by now, and a positive attitude and being surrounded by people who are willing to, go with the flow with us.
Yes.
So and I particularly, if I clear my desk, that helps me start.
Yes. Clear desk, clear mind kind of idea. Good. I'll come back and talk about the age thing because that's cool with you guys. That's not true of all of us as we age, that our coping skills get better. Sometimes we get more rigid as we get older, and so hats off to you for not being in the norm there. Okay, another group checking in? Who else do we have on our list here?
Bellingham Tech.
How about Bellingham? Oh, I'm sorry, there you are. Who's this?
This is WSUB and Clark College.
Oh, great, hello.
Hi. So we've got a couple of things. One is creating a big banner with butcher paper up in a big commons area, and all fun-colored markers, name your joy for the students and the faculty.
Wow.
To play with. Another one was to have a good news jar in faculty meetings. So when faculty come in, they can kind of jot down what went well that week, so that we could share some good news. And another one was just say no to meetings.
Wow. What would happen if, well, I guess we can talk about that later. That'll be part 3, but what happens when we start saying no to meetings? What happens when we start saying no to extra additional work? What kind of environment do you work in that will tolerate that and actually in some places reward that boundary setting? So thank you. Thank you. That's WSU and Clark. What else? Who else do we have out there in ITV land?
We have Bellingham Tech,
Okay, is Bellingham able to come on?
TCC,
Or TCC?
and Webster's,
Who's that? Maybe Van Wetz's has been making all the noise.
Wenatchee, Bellingham. It's like they
Bellingham?
here's a list of
Oh, thanks.
Hi, can you hear us?
Now I can, thank you. Yes?
Yes, this is Holly at Bellingham Tech.
Hello?
And we started with deciding that of the three, we were only going to do one,
Okay,
because that's how we are going to set limits and not overwhelm ourselves.
good.
And of those one things, we had a couple that we came up with. One is incorporating some kind of movement into every class, like having the student come up with an exercise, either a walking or something
Nice.
like that.
Nice.
The other one we came up with was making a priorities list and establishing what we're going to get done tomorrow
As a group or individuals?
as individuals.
Okay. Okay.
And the third one was just understanding which things we have influence over and understanding which things we have less influence over and focusing on the things that we can change in our workplace.
Wow, excellent. If I were in the same room with you, I'd give you a coffee coupon for that one on this. I used to talk about that a lot, the sphere of influence, that if we're unclear about where we have influence, that we get, our focus gets too diluted and we are weak everywhere. Where we focus where we do have influence, we can make more and more and more movement and actually have a lot more success and ability to do what I think of as transformative change. So excellent. And I love the movement idea as well too. Another good group. So let's see who, and now you can turn the mic off. Okay, how about, let's see, Tacoma? Are you?
This is Julie, and I'm alone.
Oh, Julie, you're not alone. You have all of us.
Yeah, so I have a, one of the ideas that I put in is that I prioritize work over exercise, and that I would try not to do that consistently.
Okay.
And ask for help with problems, maybe try to meditate.
Okay. Hard to do both of those at the same time. I've tried it, so be cautious. Thank you. Thank you. Do you want to say something from here? Okay. I was just going to say we had a robust conversation here at North Seattle, and I'll just report in quickly on one of the things we came up with here is liking the idea of riding the wave to take as a strategy now to really capture opportunities as they come. So whether it's a funding opportunity that you could do something really more robust and to, in your, let's say an example here was the simulation lab where there was money available. Professional growth, to take a strategy that to look for places where you could take advantage of every opportunity for your own growth and development. And I was talking here too about maybe the chance would be for expanding, if we were going to, let's say we were going to redesign the system for nursing education at a school, we might say every Friday, half the day is devoted to faculty development. So there'll be no office hours, there'd be no classroom teaching. That would just be half a day every Friday, and we would decide at the beginning of the year what areas we want to focus on as a faculty community and staff community, or if when we would move to some individual work too. So anyway, it was just trying to be strategic in how we're designing the system to take advantage of this. Okay, so that was some of our conversation. PLU, was PLU on at the first? Are you still around?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi.
It's just me.
Hi, how are you?
So the things that I thought of are to be realistic of my own expectations. So I often think I can handle more than I really can.
Mm-hmm.
And then to go with that, learn how to say no.
Yeah.
That's been a hard lesson in work. I can do it in life, but not at work apparently.
Yeah.
And to continue to be persistent with what I am passionate about. Sometimes I get an idea that I'm really excited about, but it's difficult to get other faculty to buy into it or want to do, possibly change the way they do their class. So just to be persistent, to think outside the box, and eventually somebody might listen.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to come back to some of the points you made when I'm in my wrap-up here, too, because I think that going that alone, for some of the things you laid out, are really hard. And so how do you build coalition and collaboration to do what you were suggesting? Last call. Okay. Well, that is the end of that is the last call. So here's where I want to how to wrap this up. Some of your strategies I really appreciated. I mean, all of them are good. What I'm curious about is some of the strategies are ones we have tried forever. Strategies that we've, the exercise more, lose weight, say no, all that, but we've not been successful. So how can we enact new strategies that will actually help us, that actually will work? And some of that is that list of 12 things around being forgiving of yourself, et cetera. I think that is a harder one. Some of it is not to go alone. Some of this is to really work on these issues as a group, and a faculty and staff group, because when we get fractured within our own work group, it's so easy to feel isolated and to not be successful in any of these strategic elements we're trying to do, which are going to try to make us more creative and more innovative to really enact some changes in our classroom where we are kind of isolated as an individual, but to make those changes so that it betters our life, the student's life, and the work community itself. So let me just take a look at the communities that I think of as deep and rich for support. All right, so we have Martin Luther King there, and I have this communities of deep and rich support. And I think one of the things I found, and maybe it's because as a consultant I get called into faculties when they are having some stress or trouble, but in the most part, faculties have not always been communities of support. And I think I want to talk about that a little bit more. So tools for this, what you were talking about earlier today, I thought in your small groups were really good. Carve out time without guilt or reservation for yourself, and you, as a group, to do that. One of my little examples earlier around, maybe you could, it's not a little example, but maybe redesign how your schedules are structured so that you actually have time as a faculty to be together and to learn together and support each other. And then the second one here is an honest look at reality and capacity. I don't know why if it's partly of who comes into nursing or if it's a female issue, but we say always, oh, I can do that, like Rosie the Riveter. We can do that. Yes, it's a giant hideous insect. We can fix it. We can do what no one else can do. And there's a moment where we just have to say, with all compassion, no. That is impossible. That is humanly impossible. Now, a machine might be able to do it, but it's humanly impossible. And so that ability to do that, I think, is going to be critical. And then feeding your soul and your mind with new thoughts and new habits. So I have that cartoon I love about the dog on the high wire, and he's realizing, oh my God, he's an old dog and this is a new trick. I think for a lot of us, we find the routine and the habit of past easier to keep enacting than to stop and question it and do something totally different. And that is what's going to keep us younger in our thinking, and that's what's going to keep us, I think, more agile in our work and nimble in our ability to ride the wave of looking at opportunities and stuff. So how do we feed our soul and our mind with new habits and new thoughts? And this collectively, just to talk with, these questions could be great to discuss in your faculty time. How do we look at reality and capacity with honesty? How do we feed our soul and our mind with new ideas and new habits of thought? Who do we bring in maybe from the outside, maybe talk about all this interdisciplinary work. How do we bring somebody in from outside nursing who might shake us up a little? How do we really continually shake ourselves up? And that would be the third item there. Number 4 is humor. To laugh and choose to be joyful. I love that sign, what brings you joy, to think about that. What if you spent a week just talking about joy? When you think about health and healing, when people say they're diseased or sick, they often talk about having a lack of sense of joy, whether it's the physical pain or ailment, or whether it's mental depression or anxiety, they no longer can feel or experience joy. And I think, oh my God, if us as healers have a hard time connecting to joy, how can we really help in the healing process if we ourselves have no capacity for joy? So that might be a very interesting thing to talk about in your community. And then addressing our drains, what really drains us, the anger, the seeking to please others instead of ourselves, the failure to say no. So it really address those. So some of the strategies might be just say no, but I think the deeper issue is how do you do that, and how do you create an environment that lets you say no, that supports you from saying no, that doesn't punish you or make you feel guilty or try to have you feel guilty. And then slow down your life, and I love the idea of putting my calendar on a diet. To schedule break time, I have now decided I am putting in times in my calendar for thinking. And when do I think best? I think best in the morning. So I'm trying not to have client visits start until 11 o'clock because I do my best thinking. Now, when I work with the East Coast world, that's not possible because they're already up and almost ready to quit by the time I'm just starting to think. So I'm still working out some of the finer points. But the point is to really have some time to think. Okay. So now I'm going to try to talk a little bit in the last 10 minutes here. Oh, maybe before we go to that, I'd like to just ask you to think about this a little bit as a strategy. And I think it's helpful if you talk about it as a work group rather than talking about it just for yourself or in your therapy office or with your significant other or your other good friends. But to think, how can you think differently? How can you begin to think less is more, that good is good enough, that you can trust your gut and intuition and trust common sense? I mean, anyway, I'm not going to launch into the failure to trust our common sense. But and speak from your gut and your intuition as well as from your intellect. I think it's really hard with this big wave of evidence-based practice and evidence-based everything else to just really say what's really happening in the world right now. And really big thinkers are not always looking at the evidence, because the evidence often points to what was a pattern of the past. What's happening now is Otto Scharmer is writing on this really well in his book Theory U, and Leadership in Theory U is his newest one. But he's talking about emergence. What are you all thinking about that you're not talking about that is really emerging as the new model or the new way of being? That is where the gold is in my world. It's not looking at what we've done in the past and what the evidence there shows, and I'm talking now in terms of organizational development and strategic thinking and change and transformation. I'm not talking about what's going to help my kidney stone as evidence. I want all the evidence possible in that world. But when we're talking about human systems, what's emerging is really a very powerful topic right now, and it's in the literature a lot more. The notion of slowing down, you all talked about that, which, or many of you mentioned that, and slowing down is also it's a strategy, but it's hard to do alone, and it's hard to do in a vacuum. So how can you do less to accomplish more? Scheduling time to think, how do you say no, thank you, and setting limits on added work. And the common denominator of all of this is how do you support yourself to do this and each other. It's very hard to be in a community where you're trying to make this kind of, these are like revolutionary changes for nursing especially, to stop and say no more, to honestly say this is impossible to continue in this way. So that was just a couple of other thoughts. So I want to talk a little bit about beyond hope and fear. And one of the things around, I want to talk about hope, because hope I'm in the middle of figuring this out myself right now, and I'm not the best teacher on this topic. But I like David Orr's comments about authentic hope can be found only in our capacity to discern the truth about our situation and ourselves, and then to summon the courage or the fortitude to act accordingly. So he's not saying hope is that, that everything will turn out well, but it's really in our ability or our capacity to discern the truth about what's really happening in our situation or ourselves, and then that we have the courage to act on it. So to me, that is a revolutionary shift in what I usually think of as hope. And yet, I'm just thinking now, right now, coming out of my earlier clinical work was as the clinical director for Hospice of Seattle. And if you think about this line, this quote around caring for somebody who's dying and for their family, the hope shifts from the healing or the cure, right, to found in their capacity to discern the truth about their situation and themselves, and to summon the courage to act accordingly. That would be a perfect, that's a nice connection there, where hope can really be invigorating and enlivening without being a tool for insincerity or faults, like the notion of boosting somebody's morale or making them feel good for the moment. So the other notion is this doing it together. And I remember in working in different work teams, whether it was in the clinical work or in my teaching work and consulting work, sometimes I don't even remember whose job it was to do what, but I knew we were in it together. And that, I think any of you who've had a really successful team experience, that you didn't get your job description out and go line by line. You did what your gifts gave you, and you were used in that team to your maximum, and that's where it's really satisfying. So in thinking about it, in working in supportive ways with your faculty and staff, is how can we be in this together and then forget the rest? That, to me, is a really big gem here. And then Thomas Merton says, do not depend on the hope of results. You may have to face the fact that your work will apparently be worthless and even achieve no result at all. If not, perhaps results even the opposite of what you expect, right? So if we hope only on outcome, we will be disappointed. But as you get used to this idea, he says, you start to move more and more to the concrete, to concentrate not on the results, but on the value, the rightness, and the truth of the work itself. So I was in a training not long ago, and the person speaking was an older gentleman, and he had spent his whole life fighting fascism. And he said, I didn't expect to win that fight, but I fought fascism because fascism was wrong. I fought fascism because it was fascism. And so I'm thinking about this in our world. I'm doing this in my classroom. I'm implementing this change, not because I think it's going to be adopted all around the world, not because I think it'll become, the NLN will say it's one of the new competencies. I'm enacting this because I think it is the right thing to do for our students and for our faculty. And that is, as Merton says, then you gradually, you struggle less and less for an idea and more for specific people. And in the end, it is the reality of personal relationship that saves everything. So I'm taking this from what the culture at large is saying to us, how can we scale everything up? How can we do something small here and it'll change the whole world? I'm saying we do it here because it's the right thing for here. And sometimes it's the right thing for the whole world. But we have to start focusing right here, right now, on what's going to help now. That hope, Václav Havel, who did so much work in bringing democracy to his part of the world in Poland there, he says, hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. And that's the same opportunity. So I'm going to close with a poem that was just, I get this poem a day in my inbox. It's just part of how I start my thinking time. And I love this poem to give us permission to do things differently. And I usually have I take time to have a really nice breakfast, and then I used to listen to NPR and read the New York Times with my breakfast, and I've stopped doing that because it's too stressful for me. It's not the way I want to start my day. And so here in my inbox was this poem by a woman who I think is living my life somewhere. And here's what it says. I allow myself, that's the name of the poem is, I Allow Myself by Dorothea Grossman. I allow myself the luxury of breakfast. I'm no nun, for God's sake. Charmed as I am by the sputter of bacon and the eye-opening properties of eggs, it's the coffee that's really sacramental. In the old days, I spread fires and floods and pestilence on my toast. Nowadays, I'm more selective. I only read my horoscope by the quiet glow of the marmalade. So this notion of allowing yourself to be different in the world and to be compassionate with yourself and others. So thus ends part 2. I think there are 10 more parts to this series, but I haven't gotten there yet. So thank you for your tolerance of all the technology wonders that we experienced today, both on the good and the bad side. And I look forward to hear from you. You'll get a little email, I'm sure, soon asking you how this went for you. So thank you, and have a good evening.